I guess it's time for us to say hi to everybody who's tuned in for our live chat on International Snow Leopard Day. Thank you all for joining. This is Dr. Kaustubh Sharma.
And this is Matthias Fechter.
He is a snow leopard expert and I pretend to be one. And together we're going to try and answer any question you guys might have about snow leopards in the coming 45 minutes, an hour, however long it takes. So please hit us with your snow leopard questions that you've always wanted to ask. Thank you, Michael.
Good morning. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shikhar. That's even better.
Love to you too, Shikhar.
Yeah.
Hey, Jennifer. Good morning. Glad you made it safe back home.
Hey, Gunnar.
Good morning.
Hi, Mark.
Happy Snow Leopard Day to you too, Hussein.
Hey, Hussein. Josh, good morning.
I love it too. I saved it for this day.
It's from a very cool organization called float.org, and they partner with us to make these, just by the way.
Hello, Christine. So Michael asks, how's the research going in Mongolia? I think it continues to be one of the most fascinating research works ever, especially on the snow leopards, because it's one of the only long-term studies ever done on the species, and with more than 25 snow leopards collared till date, camera trapping done every year, it's providing us a goldmine of data. So very excited with all the research work and the findings that are coming out from this body of work. Okay, we have a question. Francis asks if the t-shirt is for sale. Matt, would you know?
Currently we have this very same design for sale as a hoodie in a very limited edition. Let me see if I can find Terry, our sales guy, and ask him how you guys can get your hands on these.
Christine, I wish we knew the answer to that. There are various numbers that float around, anywhere between 3,000 to 6,000. Some people say they could be as many as 10,000. But really, we don't. All of these are at best guesstimates. And one of the reasons why we, all the snow leopard conservation organizations, have come together to get together to make an effort to estimate how many snow leopards are in the world. There's a fascinating initiative. You can find more about it on the net, which is called PAWS, which stands for Population Assessment of the World's Snow Leopards. So hopefully in the next few years' time, we should be able to give you a much better answer than provide you with a guesstimate of anywhere between 3,000 to 7,000 or more.
I'll be trying to answer a couple of questions also in writing on the page while Kaustubh is answering the more complicated ones live to you guys, but please keep them coming.
Thank you, Viz. So we do have 5 country program offices in Asia. They are in India, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and China. These are our partner organizations there, but we are also partnering, one of the key technical partners in the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, which allows us to engage and provide technical support to all the 12 snow leopard range countries.
We have a question from Cheryl. How many cats we're currently tracking?
At this point in time, we have 5 cats with active collars. And each caller sends an SMS to our email IDs every 5 hours. So there are times people make fun of me or one of our colleagues saying that you are more in touch with the snow leopards than your own family. But that's how it is. And yes, with Smith, we do have an office around Leh Ladakh region. We can send you more details if you kindly get in touch with us on a messenger or email.
Right, so now we have a very interesting scientific question from Matthew. Recently we had an article out about a study that we had done where the argument was that female snow leopards choose their mates rather than males choosing the females. And Matthew had previously read that when a female has older cubs, males might kill them to try and put the female in heat. And he thinks there's tension between these two studies. Can you talk about that question?
Yeah, so again, good question. The only thing is, when you say that females make a choice, I think it's always been the case. It's the females who determine, or let me put it the other way around. For females, it's the food that is the main resource. But for the males, it's females which are the main resource. So it's certainly, it's certainly the case that we've been following. And I don't think there is a tension. Both make sense. And we've seen it not just in snow leopards, but in other species as well, that females try to maximize the chances of saving their cubs. And in case of tigers, also we've known that females move out into certain areas where the chances of a male causing an infanticide reduce. So I don't think these are conflicting or contradicting, but they are more in support of each other. It's a matter of how we perceive the findings of both these bodies of work.
We had a question that's already sort of scrolled down. How many partner countries there are in snow leopard conservation? There's 12 snow leopard range countries who are all very active in trying to protect this cat. We work in 5 of them on the ground, and we have relationships with all of them, working together with all of them. We also have a question now, what is the biggest challenge for snow leopard conservation? Which I think is one for you, Kostya.
So I think the biggest challenge for snow leopard conservation is to scale up the work that we are doing at a community level or at a site level. Threats to snow leopards are constantly changing. It's not going to remain constant. And if you go back 10 years ago, the kind of threats snow leopards were facing were entirely different than what the threats are now, barring a few overlapping and continuing threats. So the biggest challenge is to constantly address these threats, constantly monitor these threats, and at the same time scale up so that we make a real impact at the scale where you're not just saving 1 or 2 individuals, but larger populations. One of the recent studies from the Snow Leopard Trust indicated that less than 40% of the protected areas are big enough to have entire even one snow leopard range encompassed within that. So it just shows that we need to work at much larger scales, at landscape scales. And when you work at a landscape scale, I think that's when it becomes more crucial to be able to look at a multitude of solutions, multitude of threats, and look at multitude of solutions.
Another question from Joanne, which I think is very interesting. Do you think some of the snow leopards know you by sight and smell, and that they recognize you as a safe human versus a poacher, for instance? Which I think is something that is common in primate research. Famous examples of that.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, but just to let you know that one of my favorite encounters was with a female snow leopard which was collared for the first time in this study in South Gobi, Mongolia. And what was most fascinating was that less than 5 hours before the female was collared, our team was setting up the trap, and there were like 5 people sweating, digging, spending almost 2 or 3 hours in that site. So I don't think it really mattered to the snow leopard that humans are there. Humans are everywhere, but I'm not sure whether they're able to distinguish between good humans and bad humans. Yes, maybe gunpowder or some of those smells could send out some triggers, but we don't really know.
Next question from Amber. Do you think free-roaming packs of dogs are a threat to snow leopards?
Absolutely. these dogs can be a big threat. There are quite a few videos if you go online and just search for dog and snow leopard. You'll realize that there are instances where packs of dogs are cornering snow leopards. There's a recent video from somewhere in India, in the northern part of India, where dogs are mobbing and chasing a snow leopard. So they definitely are a threat. In fact, in parts of India, recent studies and publications are revealing that dogs are killing more livestock, not just wildlife, but also livestock, than wolf and snow leopard put together. So they're not only a threat to snow leopards, they're also a threat to human livestock, and eventually are causing a lot more trauma to the communities living there, which eventually also reduces their tolerance and causes a change in their attitudes towards predators.
There's a question from Usama about how students can join this sort of work, especially in Pakistan, and I'm just answering in writing as well. But generally, we have a partner organization in Pakistan called Snow Leopard Foundation. They're one of the leading conservation groups in the country, and feel free to get in touch with them and see what the opportunities might be.
End of the day, the best of the work is done by students. So you're most welcome if you are interested, if you have the passion. I think we're looking for you.
Scroll up. There's another question about students and interns, international or not, working with us. Yes, we frequently have a lot of students working in the field with us, and as Kostub said, they are in many ways the backbone of the work we do.
Absolutely.
It's difficult to see what the newest questions are.
So Kathleen asks, do you think the progress in protecting snow leopards in many countries is because of community-based conservation programs or to government policies to provide more protection? So I think we really can't separate these two. Unless we have communities on board for a species like snow leopard, which lives in such remote areas, which has such large home ranges, which moves across such massive spaces, it cannot be a success unless you really have people, the local communities, on board. And end of the day, if you have the support of the government providing a framework where community-based conservation can become successful and be scaled at a level where it can be replicated in the right way across other landscapes. I think that's the key. So if you ask me, it would be a combination of the two, working with communities and making sure that there is government support towards doing this.
There's a question about trophy hunting, how common it is for both snow leopards and their prey.
So there is no trophy hunting, legally there's no trophy hunting of snow leopards across any of the snow leopard range countries. Each country provides the highest level of protection to snow leopards, and none of them allows legally any hunting to be done. Prey hunting is a conservation tool in some of the countries. We have some very interesting examples from countries like Pakistan, to some extent in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, parts of Mongolia, where trophy hunting of some prey is used as a conservation tool. But yes, for sure, there is no trophy hunting of snow leopards.
Oh, and just to add to this, because this of course is a topic that for many people is emotional on both sides of the issue. There are trophy hunting conservation programs that are based in communities that benefit communities. It's not something we as an organization engage in, though. We believe there are other ways of achieving the same result in the areas we work in, and so we the Snow Leopard Trust as an organization does not have any trophy hunting programs.
Beth asks a very interesting question. What is the most common misperception about snow leopard conservation? I think one of the most common misperceptions about snow leopard conservation is that, we are all doing everything just for one species and it's just this beautiful species. Yes, snow leopard is a beautiful species. Yes, it's a charismatic apex predator. But by just working on snow leopard conservation, we are also talking about working with local communities. We are also talking about prey species. We are also talking about entire ecosystem habitats, and to put it together, the entire ecosystem and the services it provides to humans. So yeah, I think that's a myth that needs to be broken sooner than later, that snow leopard conservation is just about one species being saved or some individuals of a species being saved. It's not just a species, it's an entire ecosystem that the snow leopard is only a flagship of. Thank you, Marissa. Let's cover a huge number of snow.
There's a lot of questions. Where's the best place to visit and see the snow leopard? Bridget asks.
So Bridget, there are some homestay-based, community-based tourism programs which are operational. The ones that we are aware of operating fairly well are in India. For instance, there are some programs in Ladakh that we are aware of, and they're very popular as well. There are some similar programs in China as well that we are aware of. Also Mongolia. So these are some of the sites where people do get to see it. But just a rider here is that tourism can be a double-edged sword. If done properly, it's a great conservation tool. But if done slightly wrong, then it can not only create problems for the ecosystem, environment, species, but also the local communities. So if you're going out looking for snow leopards, please do a bit of research about which site, which program you're going to go with, what are their tourism ethics, how are they aligning with the local community's interests, and then you should be able to make make an informed decision there.
So I think we have two questions that are similar about what people here in the US or other places outside of the snow leopard range can do to raise awareness and to help the cause in universities and elsewhere.
So let's start by saying that unfortunately the snow leopards can't vote, and the policies, the activities, let's say for instance mining, for example, the most damaging activities, not just mining but also illegal wildlife trade, a lot of it is driven from some of these affluent countries. So if you can become the voice of the snow leopard, if you can become the voice of the snow leopard to help reduce illegal wildlife trade, to help reduce pressure on some of these areas and landscapes which are under threat by excessive, unplanned, poorly planned infrastructure and mining, I think that's the biggest service one can do towards these magnificent species.
There's a question by Amber about the recent paper that came out by Janecka and other authors about. So they found that there are 3 distinct subspecies of snow leopards based on genetic records. So that's a very, very specific scientific question that maybe you can give a quick answer to.
Sure. So can I find the question somewhere?
You can read it right here.
Yeah. So any science is valuable, and until very recently we really had no idea about species and subspecies. And this is fascinating, the work by Janecka that indicates at a possibility of 3 subspecies. There are a couple of people we are aware of who are proposing to add some more value to the work that Janecka has proposed, or to the subspeciation that he has proposed, his body of work. So yes, I mean all of this is really, really valuable, and it's end of the day, the subspecies, if we are able to identify them with reasonable confidence, then they allow us to develop conservation programs according to these conservation units, and that's always a valuable thing to know.
There's a question about the population estimate for Pakistan from Usama. Can you give a range of what is a realistic population estimate for Pakistan?
As I said, I think we really don't have any reasonable estimates. There has been some extensive camera trapping work done by the Snow Leopard Foundation in Pakistan, and if I remember it correctly, I think they came up with around 100, between 100 and 150 snow leopards. But again, I'll have to look up the exact number. But that's again based on very limited sampling, and we're talking about several thousand square kilometers. So the hope is that in the next few years, the next 3 years or so, as we embark upon this very ambitious goal of achieving, of estimating snow leopard populations, we will be able to give you a much better answer. But yes, from a sampled area, we do have a number of around 100, 120 or something. But from the entire range, again, the numbers vary. Some people say as few as 100, 150. Some of the estimates go up to about 500. So there's really very little we can say on that at this point in time.
We have a couple more questions. There's one from Chaksa, who is curious why we are focusing our work on particular areas in the countries we work in, and whether there is competition or even conflict between different NGOs working in this field.
Now, that's a very good question. No, it's. I mean, there could be competition, yes, but the reason we are working in certain areas is usually a combination of multiple factors. A, accessibility, and B, history of how we have been engaged. If you read this very fascinating book called Partners' Principles, you'll realize that to work in a certain area, you really need a very long-term engagement, and the way to engage there is through prolonged presence. So the reason why we are working in some certain areas is primarily because we have been present there for a longer period of time. But that's changing. If you notice that under this pause initiative, we are now expanding our sampling into areas which have never been sampled before. And under the GSLEP program, with the support of the country governments and other partner organizations, we are trying to slowly expand the conservation programs into regions where we have not worked earlier. So yes, I mean, a lot of it has some history to it, but then things are moving further.
It's at the end of the day, it's a question of limited resources. I mean, if we had enough people, we would definitely work in more areas, and I think that's true for all the conservationists out there. There's a very interesting question from John that I think will be great to answer. Whether you and I both can remember our first encounter with a wild snow leopard? Yes, definitely, and how it made us feel.
My first encounter with the snow leopard was in South Gobi with a male snow leopard. We knew the snow leopard because he also had a collar. He was called Astai, and well, he was almost as far as Matt is with me. And I was just standing on a ledge, and this guy just climbed up, never realizing that I was standing there. And when he looked at me, he had these big round eyes, and almost said that, "How the hell did you get so close to me without me getting to know?" I mean, these cats, they believe they're invisible, and if they get spotted, they get like, "Oops, they've seen me." But anyway, the best thing it did, it just looked at me for a couple of seconds, turned around, and just flared away right like a ribbon. Yeah. I still, if you ask me, on a blank snow leopard face, I can mark all the scars he had on his face. I didn't take a picture. I didn't have the. I think I didn't even want to take a picture because I just wanted to view this cat up so close. But yes, I can mark all the scars that he had on his heavily scarred face. He was a big fighter.
My encounter, I've only had one. It's not quite as, I think, stunning or mind-blowing as Kostup's. It was this spring in April. I had the chance to spend almost a month in the field with our research team, and they were there to try and collar snow leopards. And so my very final night in camp, I had already given up hope. Just before I was about to leave, the alarm goes off. All these traps have alarms. So we go there, and we had caught a snow leopard. And my colleague, Orion, who is the guy who does all the collaring work, he tranquilized the cat, and then we started working on it, making sure its vitals are good, attaching a collar to it. And I got to touch it, and then I got to watch it wake up and walk away. And I think the most stunning moment for me was when So they blindfold the cat during the time they work on it while it's asleep. And then when it wakes up, they take off the blindfold. And so in that moment, you're very, very close to the snow leopard. And when we took the blindfold off, he just raised his head and looked at us. And it was, yeah, again, like 1 or 2 meters away from us, and just looked at me. I will never forget that. I mean, that was an amazing moment. And then he walked off into the distance, never to be seen again.
Wow. Terry has an interesting question. Do you use the same model or approach for all countries that you work in? No. In fact, you'll be surprised that for 2 communities separated by, let's say, 200 kilometers, the conservation models might be entirely different. I think the key to any successful conservation program is that it should be based on the situation analysis. It should be based on how on a lot of things. What are the cultural background? What is the religious backdrop? What are the socio-economic situation there? What are the kind of threats the animals are facing? And how people's attitudes are towards wildlife. So there's a combination of these. And then also there are some, as I said, cultural and religious factors which determine to a large extent what may or may not work. So the key to a successful conservation program is really, spending time and working with the communities on to come up with the most plausible and pragmatic solutions. So the answer is no. The same model is not replicated even in 2 communities which might be just 200 kilometers apart.
We have 2 questions that I can see. One is whether snow leopards that are in captivity for zoos, whether these are still being captured in the wild for that reason.
No. So there's no new snow leopards being captured for zoos at all. There are a couple of recent instances, by recent I mean in the last 10 years, where injured snow leopards or animals which were found abandoned or mistakenly found abandoned were kept in captivity, and they have been brought into some of these in this larger network of captive snow leopard populations. But actively, no snow leopards are being captured from the wild for zoos at all. The genetic diversity of the zoo population, which is nearly 500 individuals, is fairly rich, making it not necessary to capture new animals from the wild.
And it would also not be done even if that was not the case. I think it's, neither would the countries allow that, nor would the zoo community actually do that. Yeah. I think they've moved on from these practices quite a long time ago. There's a question from Joshua. So 3 years ago, one of our partner communities in Pakistan was hit by very severe flooding and landslides, and most of their infrastructure was destroyed. And at that time, we ran a campaign to help these communities out and asked our supporters to raise funds. And Joshua is asking how these communities are doing today. What I know, I don't know how they're doing right now in the last year or so. I haven't had any news, but what I do know is that they were able to rebuild their water supply system for their fields, for their irrigation, thanks to these donations, and that it made a huge difference for them, and that it had definitely helped strengthen the relationship we have with this community. It's still a life of hardship, and these are people who live with very little, and they're very much exposed to the elements. So things like that can happen again, and it's not going to be an easy life for them, but definitely everybody who gave to that campaign helped these people a lot to overcome that moment of crisis.
Yeah, and just to add to it, it's not going to get any better because the projections under climatic changes that are taking place indicate that the frequency of such events is going to be on the increase, and with that there'll be a lot more effort that we might need to put in to maintain and sustain our partnerships with these wonderful communities with whom we've been working.
We have a very interesting question from Vincent. He talks about a page we had a couple of years back where people could help sorting through camera trap pictures, trying to identify species, trying to see, is there a snow leopard here, or is it an ibex, or is it something else? And he's wondering if that was helpful and if we're planning to do more of that in the future.
Oh, absolutely. It was several days of work that you guys helped us go through. We do have some plans, and you're most welcome to get in touch and with our volunteer managers and help with more. But just to add to that, we have a very interesting partnership building up with Microsoft, where some of that work is also now being automated. So you will have some more work that we would like to take your help with. But yes, so there are fascinating developments happening in that field, where artificial intelligence based tools are now beginning to help us scan through hundreds of thousands of images. So while it was great to have your help, and we will continue to have more help from you, just want to also update you that with more and more cameras being set up in the field, it's just going to get more and more difficult, which is why we're now also having to take the help of artificial intelligence.
Well, there's a couple of questions just coming in. One, I think it came through the phone because it was posted by one of our colleagues. Rubina would like to know how many cubs snow leopards have in the wild, and she also wants to know how they are made and born, but you can feel free to just take the first part of it.
Okay, yeah, so
I think you should take both.
Of course, I'll take both.
Good.
Thank you, Rubina, for the lovely question. By the way, Rubina is this 5-year-old lovely little girl.
Yeah, she's Marissa's daughter.
Yes.
Marissa is one of our colleagues who manages our zoo program, and her daughter.
So Rubina, typically anywhere between 1 to 4 cubs are known to be born. Most cases we have seen 2 cubs. Some rare cases we have seen 3 cubs or 1, and in some extreme rare cases we have seen up to 4 cubs with 1 female. Yeah, that mom has to be really a super mom to be able to take care of 4 brats growing up together. And how cubs are born? So because snow leopards live alone, they don't meet each other often. The boy snow leopard and the girl snow leopard, they move around individually, but they do have what we call as their Facebook page. So each snow leopard has a wall posting where they go and spray and leave some marking. So if there's a girl snow leopard who's looking for a boyfriend, she'll go and rub her marking, and those signs might say that I'm looking for a boyfriend. Or if there is a boy snow leopard who wants to want other boys to come into his area and and have a fight with him, his message might say that, hey, stay away from my area. This is my territory. So basically, these are the messaging, the wall posts where snow leopards communicate, and only in the spring season is when a female is interested or is ready to have cubs. She comes, she mates with the snow leopard, and cubs are born after 3 months. So it's much shorter than humans, but these are little tiny fur balls that are born, and the mama snow leopard finds a very secure and safe den to give birth to these cubs. She takes care of these cubs for almost 1.5 years, and by then these cubs are grown up. They try how to hunt, they try how to find their own food, and slowly move away and start their own life. So I hope that answers your question.
Next question comes from Sandra. She's a wildlife veterinarian from Mexico working on jaguars there, which is very cool. And she's interested whether we have any disease-related research going on, and whether we've noticed diseases in snow leopard populations that we are studying.
Yeah, now that's a very valid question, and given the amount of risk these animals face because of the interface with livestock, dogs, and humans, it can become a serious threat. There've been a couple of research work that has gone in, especially in this long-term ecological studies site in Mongolia, and one of our students has recently started to work in Central Asia to explore and understand the disease ecosystem across the snow leopard habitats. So we don't really know much about it yet, but there are studies which are going on, and as you rightly say, a lot of this is going to become much bigger of a threat and an issue as climate change forces more and more interaction between humans, livestock, and wildlife, and of course changing in temperatures as well.
Great. So there's a question from Jajit about the traffic report from 2 years ago. So just to give some context, 2 years ago, Traffic, which is this great NGO working to combat illegal wildlife trade, they issued a report about snow leopard poaching and killing. And that report said or estimated that annually there's between 220 to 400 snow leopards that are being killed somewhere across the Cats Range. That's per year. So very, very roughly, you could say it's about one snow leopard per day. And he is curious what our opinion is on this report.
So I think the work, if you read through it carefully, it's done very well. Yes, in an ideal situation, even the authors themselves would have wanted more data and to be able to substantiate their claims. But yes, it is an alarming figure. The only fact, as I say, that even the authors themselves would have appreciated more data into this. Towards which I just want to point you to another very interesting initiative that the Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, which is this consortium or an alliance of 12 country governments, NGO partners, and UN agencies, is that of maintaining an illegal wildlife trade database. So all the authors from that body of work, other researchers who have collected data from other sites about poaching and trafficking of snow leopards and related wildlife, all this data is now being pooled together, maintained at one site, to be able to make it possible for us to make better assessments of the real situation in the field. So yes, I mean, our opinion is that that's a landmark, a baseline, and we need to just keep adding more information to be able to improve our understanding to it. Jayjit has another question.
Oh, did he?
About how can we use modern technologies like drone for initiatives like PAWS. Oh man, you're talking. Yes.
Keep it short. This is Costume's favorite topic, but we have other questions. Keep it short, please.
Yeah. And of course, how can we engage with armed forces? I mean, you're hitting on the right nerves, Jayjit. All of these are possible. There are some excellent examples of organizations using drones for collecting valuable data, not just about anti-poaching initiatives, but also data from camera traps and so on. All of this is possible. The only restriction at this point is that many countries have legal obligations that need to be addressed before using these technologies the right way. Two, there are some technological inhibitions right now, which make it a little difficult to use technologies such as drones in high altitude systems. Winds are stronger, the mountains are much more vertical, the landscape is not as easy to fly as it is in the plains. But the pace at which technology is improving, I'm very, very hopeful that this will become valuable. And armed forces, one cannot overemphasize the importance of the security agencies, not just in controlling illegal wildlife trade because they are the custodians of international borders, but also in helping support and collect some valuable data, because they're there all the time. And they have some fascinating stories and information that can be very valuable to understand the snow leopard habitat and ecosystems better.
There's a question from Tara, which I find very interesting.
Yes.
The question is, do snow leopard moms give over some part of their territory to their daughters when they grow up?
Now, that's a very good question. In snow leopards, we may not really have a good answer to that, but I can go back and borrow some information from tiger study that I was assisting in several years ago. That yes, the mom's range does shrink a little bit when the daughters kind of disperse into the neighboring areas. So moms do take a bit of a sacrifice there. We know from one study, the only study on tigers in central India with long-term telemetry work. So there seems to be that tendency in these cats. But we don't really know very well in tigers. We don't have many mother-daughter pairs which have been collared yet.
There's a question from Gabi from Brazil. She's also a jaguar biologist. Seem to have several of those.
Nice.
She is interested how biologists like her can get started working on snow leopards because it's a dream species for her to work on.
Well, I mean, come over. That's all. Just come over. You're most welcome. I mean, we're always looking for people who are passionate and who are good in the field. So, yeah. People often say that there is a dearth of opportunities. I might tend to disagree. There's a dearth of passionate, hardworking people who can really spend time and effort and energy in the field. So, most welcome. Come over.
Question from Maggie: why can't snow leopards roar?
So technically, there's a very interesting reason. They say that the vocal cords of the snow leopards they lack the folds that are necessary to make that low frequency roar. Having said that, I mean, it really is up to us. How do you define roar? I mean, we've heard snow leopards make kind of a meowing sound, which if you make it slightly lower frequency by a few tenths of hertz, it'll sound like a roar. So technically it's the lack of folds in the vocal cords which make it impossible for them to make a proper roar. But if you really bug a snow leopard, they make a nasty hiss, and that's equally effective as a roar would be.
A question from Amber we almost missed. She saw footage from a camera trap that showed a common leopard sharing the same habitat as a snow leopard. Yeah. And she's curious if this could become a threat to the snow leopard.
So to start with, we don't really know whether this has been the case historically. We know for sure that from 2 or 3 sites now that there are leopards in snow leopard habitats. But we don't really know whether it was not the case 10 years ago, 20 years ago or so. So there's some very interesting research which has just started in parts of China, especially in the area where this snow leopard and leopard encounter was recorded, to really get a better understanding of what is the level of overlap. But to be very honest, there are big predators like tigers who live with leopards. There are predators like snow leopards who live with lynx, and they manage to find their own niche, whether it's a temporal niche that one is active in a certain time, the other is active in another time, or it's a spatial niche that they use different types of microhabitats within their ranges. We don't really know that. So hopefully these new bodies of work which are out in the field will give us some better answers towards that.
Question from Louise: do tigers and snowies live close to each other in the wild?
Only in Bhutan is where we know this to be happening. There are sites where tigers have been found at altitudes which are typically known to be snow leopard habitats. So yes, they do seem to overlap a little bit in some parts in Bhutan that we are aware of.
Michael has just posted a link. Michael is our executive director, and he is reminding us, I think, to mention that we have 2 interesting events on the East Coast coming up this week. If you're interested in joining these events, one of them is in New York City. I will go and check out when exactly. So basically there's an event in New York City and an event in Washington, D.C. for our supporters and people who would like to become supporters to come and learn more about us. You can find all the details on our page, but I'll also look up the exact dates while Costume answers the next question.
Can I also mention the LA event?
Oh yes, and also there is another event in Los Angeles next week on the 30th actually of October, where we are partnering with the Asian World Film Festival, which is a really cool film festival highlighting the cinema of Asia. And we'll have a snow leopard cocktail reception on the 30th in Culver City, California. Details about that will also be on our Facebook page. There's an interesting question about the closeness of the relationship between tigers and snow leopards in behavior from Matthew.
You referenced tigers. So if you ask me, technically tigers are the closest relatives of the snow leopards. Genetically, if you look at it, there was a very fascinating paper which more or less kind of settled the whole query about snow leopard's scientific name as well. Now, earlier it used to be called with it used to be known with two names, Uncia and Panthera uncia. But this study kind of established snow leopards to be within Panthera and technically closest to snow leopards. Snow leopards and tigers being the closest species. The only reason I have mentioned tiger is because I know a little bit about tiger. That's the only, and it is another big cat. So no other reason. If there was someone other than me who had some more information about jaguars or pumas, they would have mentioned that. But big cats do have very similar tendencies, and at the same time some intriguing differences between them. There was a recent paper which compared the similarities and differences between cougars and snow leopards. You can go and find it online. So yes, I mean, we do tend to get into these other species, other big cats, which may share some similar traits. That's the only reason I mentioned that a few times.
Kostub knows a lot about tigers, but too modest to say.
Very little.
Just briefly, our events are tomorrow, Wednesday the 24th at 6:30 in New York City, and on October 29th, which is next Monday, at 6:30 in Washington, D.C. Please go to the events tab on the Facebook page for details about these events. And then we have a very interesting question from Amber, which is, what did you think about the IUCN's downgrade of the snow leopard from endangered to vulnerable? And just to give a brief context here, so the IUCN Red List is sort of the authority on the status of endangerment or threat to a species. And it's being reassessed every couple of years for each species that's on there. The snow leopard has been categorized as endangered on that red list for, I think, close to 30 years, every time it was assessed. But the latest assessment, which came out last year, changed that and changed the status of the snow leopard to vulnerable, which is still a status of high threat, but one level below the current status, the previous status of endangered. So Kostub can
so essentially the downgrading did happen based on an assessment which and there is a very clear I mean there are two groups. One group believes that the downgrading is justified. The other one provides logic and reasoning about why it is not justified. So the ball is out in the out there. I mean, the ball is in the court of the two groups, and there is going to be a follow-up discussion about this. So we don't really, I mean, as far as we are concerned, we believe that the information out there is not substantial enough to be able to make a statement about downgrading without really being, I mean, it's basically losing your caution over species downlisting without really having the substantial data. But then I fully respect the view of the other group as well, who might have differences of opinion here. And that's what makes science valuable, right? In science, you have to disagree to come up to a new solution. So we are very fascinated, and we are working with all the groups involved here to express and to make it better. And we are really hoping that this population assessment of the world's snow leopards is going to be a valuable, going to bring out a valuable output, which will probably settle this question once and for all.
And just to add to that, while we do disagree with the change as an organization, I think that the key thing that everybody agrees on is that the snow leopard remains under threat and needs a lot of attention and conservation action. And I think for everybody involved in this, that's where our focus lies and is going to lie going forward. There is a question related to that from Tara about funding. So she is asking whether this downgrade will have an impact on funding sources and whether it will reduce funding specifically.
You want to take that?
I can definitely answer part of that question, which is funding that comes from donations from individual supporters to the organization. On that track, we have not noticed any difference at all. I think our supporters realize that the snow leopard is under threat, and they give donations and give support to help us protect the snow leopard, and that does not depend on a status, which is a technicality at the end of the day. Because I think no one disagrees that there is a threat and that there is a need for funding and for support. It may be different when it comes to the more institutional funding, coming from large foundations, transnational organizations, there might be certain limited funding opportunities that are no longer there, but there will be others that are going to be opening up. So at the end of the day, this IUCN issue will probably have very, very limited impact on funding. And it's also not, in a way, it's not relevant. This is a scientific question, it's a technicality, and the funding will not really play into it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add to it.
That's perfect. I think that's fine. Varun Chopra asks, like tigers, do male snow leopards cause any threat to the cubs? We don't really know. We've not seen any case of infanticide, but there's no reason why it should not be the case. And on in the same breath, I can say maybe it's not. It doesn't happen. And this recent study, how females make that choice, maybe the females manage to not send out the signals that will, probably lead to infanticide. So I think that's we don't really know, to be honest.
There's a question from Susan that is really great. What are measures that are working well to improve the number of snow leopards?
So there's a multitude of conservation tools that are out there in the field, and if there's one thing common in them, in the successful ones, it is participation of the local communities. All of the successful snow leopard conservation models have communities at the core of it. If you look at this global consortium of countries with the Global Snow Leopard Ecosystem Protection Program, even there, the role of communities is at the center stage. So, in some areas it's offsetting losses to predators through a locally owned insurance program. In some areas it's improving livelihoods through an enterprise program. In some areas it's vaccination of livestock to improve people's tolerance to losses by predators. In some areas it's reducing losses by creating corrals, by improving corrals so that animals, so that predators don't enter and kill livestock. So it's really it's really location specific, situation specific solutions. But as I said earlier, the key common thing in all of these programs which are successful is that they are all based on communities, the local communities and their interests.
Just scrolling through here if we have any unanswered questions
Sure.
at this point. Thanks Umer and Ali and a few other people who commented that it was an interesting session. We're very glad to hear that. One thing I just wanted to briefly mention is that today, first of all, is International Snow Leopard Day, so hopefully you'll all go out and spread the word and post on Facebook and on Twitter and everywhere else, wherever you may be. It's also the final day of our anniversary celebration of a very important snow leopard study that we've been fortunate enough to be able to run, thanks to the support of people like you. And maybe Kostov, you can briefly talk about this study that we've been doing in Mongolia and why it's been so important.
Sure. So in 2008, the Snow Leopard Trust, along with its partner organizations, started the first ever long-term ecological study on snow leopards in South Gobi, Mongolia. The reason behind starting something like that was learnings from other species, such as tigers, lions, cheetahs, where long-term studies revealed aspects and facets of a species that could never be understood by snapshot studies of 2 years, 3 years, 6 months, 5 years or so. If you look at some of the most incredible long-term studies, you'll see that if you just take out a snapshot of 3 years, you might say that everything is going well. And if you increase that snapshot of time to 10 years, you'll realize that it was going well only for that short period of time. Eventually, everything crashed, and it was. The population may have, for instance, gotten locally extinct. So the idea was to be able to understand a species better. You need long-term study. You need to be present there, follow individuals over time, over years, follow populations, and understand the dynamics, which includes mortality, recruitment, migration, connectivity to neighboring habitats over a long period of time. So given these requirements, the study was started in 2008. We have a snow leopard catching machine, which is this guy called Ørjan Johansen. He's just finished his PhD. He actually holds a world record in successfully capturing and collaring the most number of snow leopards without a single mortality. And so Ørjan has been spearheading the collaring part of the study. We've had a lot of local students, international students, spend time, several months at times, to understand, learn the tricks of the trade, understand how to set up camera traps, how to collect camera trap data, how to analyze different data sets, how to do prey surveys, and use them to better inform management. So all this, and then of course, as I mentioned, studies about diseases, studies about overlaps between humans and wildlife, and some of our most conspicuous researchers who've continued working in this region include Puji, for example. She was there on the first day when we were setting up the camp, when the camp was being set up in South Gobi, and she still continues to spend considerable amount of time there. She leads a very strong team of local rangers now who are trained by her and other partners to set up camera traps, collect data, and manage a lot of other activities around this research program. We've had one of our most prized researchers, Sumbe, who unfortunately passed away 3 years ago, who was again one of the mountain climbing machines, as I used to call him, and the body of work that he produced, the body of work that Puji, Ørjan, Sumbe, and all these other researchers have produced, I think they're really improving our understanding about snow leopard ecology in a landscape over a longer period of time, really improving our sense of understanding about the species, what they need, and in fact, some of this data is now informing a larger expansion of research, like how to do camera trap surveys, how to set up cameras, what kind of data is expected, or what durations are expected to be for the cameras to be set out. So a lot of these things, a lot of the design work, a lot of the baselines have been set up thanks to this long-term study in Mongolia.
We have a question from Jaichit about, it's very technical, about field space.
You should be sleeping now, it's 12 o'clock in India.
About field-based toolkits. Maybe you can answer this in writing at some point, because I think it's going to be a bit too technical for most of the people here. There's a question from Susan, which I think is a nice one for us to answer. What has surprised you the most about snow leopards?
Which question is it?
Right here. What has surprised you most about snow leopards?
Oh, everything. I mean, tell me one thing which hasn't surprised us. I mean, starting from how easily they seem to be wearing an invisibility cloak and just vanish right in front of you. You know there is a snow leopard there because you've seen it walk away after a collaring session, and suddenly you just can't see it. I mean, you know it's right, not even 100 meters from where you are. So the way they go invisible right in front of your eyes, starting from that to how frequently they hunt, where all they are managing to hunt, and I mean what all they're managing to hunt, from chukar partridge and marmots to bringing down camels. I mean these are killing machines in other words, and one of the most incredible examples of evolution at its best. So yeah, I mean, if everything about snow leopard surprises us, or maybe it doesn't surprise us. I mean, we expect it to be something fancy and super cool.
I think that's a beautiful question to end this on, which I think a lot of people share from Tara. And she says more than anything, she wants to be a part of the effort to save big cats. And Dr. Rabinovitz, who sadly passed away recently, was a hero of hers. But she's passionate and at the same time she's getting older, so maybe a career in conservation is no longer an option, and she does not have the money to donate substantially. What can she do? What can people like her do?
You have the power of internet with you. You have the power of communication with you, and I think probably, if not more than as much as money and physical presence in a particular work can help, I think spreading the word. The more the people are aware of not just the beauty of the snow leopard, but the plight of the species as well. The more they are aware, the more it strengthens those working out in the field to be able to address those threats, to be able to reach out to local communities, governments, policymakers, to help develop situations that the species survive for hundreds of years to come. So I think, at this point, you have the world at your fingertips. So just use it, and feel free to be in touch with our volunteer partners. There's a lot you can do in where you are. There's a lot you can do by volunteering and interning with us. So feel free to be in touch, and I'm sure our teams here will be more than happy to have more out of your passion for these wonderful species.
I think, what you said is absolutely true, and I think one thing to add, that if you have a zoo in your area where you live that has snow leopards, zoos always gladly take volunteer docents and people who have a passion for any species really, and want to share that passion with other zoo visitors. And I think that's a very valuable thing that people can do if you have the time and the possibility to do that. So we get a lot of people who get to know us and get to know the snow leopard through zoos. And then they come to us because they want to know more about how to conserve the species in the wild, for instance. And so that's another option for a lot of people that I think is a beautiful thing to explore. Do you want to do one more?
Sure, happy.
Okay. Final question from Jajit. What role does religion and culture play in community-based conservation?
A very strong one. As I initially stated, the way people would respond to a specific conservation model or the possibility of a conservation model can have huge implications on what may work and what may not. Insurance, for example, just as an example, insurance is something that is not acceptable under Islam, for instance. So you can't have that work in an Islamic country. Culturally speaking, the way the Buddhist communities are, it's quite different than how the communities from another region might be. So yes, both culture and religion play a very, very important role, and it's of paramount importance for whoever is working in whichever areas to be aware and sensitive to these very strong societal networks.
There's a beautiful example of this just recently from our program in India. Our
no!
background. I think this is a sign that it's time for us to end this. I just want to briefly say this. Our team in India has worked with the local community, which is a Buddhist community in Ladakh, to convert old traditional wolf traps in this area, which are basically holes in the ground with rocks built around them, so that if a wolf falls in because it's baited by a dead goat, it can't get out, and then the wolf would be killed in there. And we've worked with a couple of communities in Ladakh to convert such wolf traps into Buddhist stupas, which are these beautiful, how would you describe those?
Yeah, stupas are these structures of...
Not quite a pyramid, but...
Yeah, sort of a pyramid.
Sort of a pyramid, that are very important religious symbols. And so it's sort of been an attempt to convert something negative, a site of killing, into a site of worship for these people. And I think these are examples for how you can respect and cherish local traditions and religions and use them for the good of conservation, which is something I think we are trying to exploit and work with as much as we can. And with this, I believe the snow leopard backdrop is telling us that it's time to wrap up. So I just want to thank everybody for participating, for asking great questions. This was very informative and fun for me to hear what Kostub had to say as well. And I hope we'll be doing this again in the future.
Yeah, and I just want to do some fun thing before we go out. And
Which
it
one
would
do
be
this
this. I'll see you guys soon.
See you guys soon. Thank you. You end it, I think.
Are we done? Not yet. It's not ended.
Post it on the finish. Yeah, that's where you.
Bye everyone.